What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. We have a monster edition for you this week. Maybe we could even call it a freaky edition. Yeah, that's right. Because Bruce Feldman's Freaks List dropped this week, so we had to bring him on. It's on The Athletic. You know Bruce Feldman from all his work with Fox. He's an incredibly accomplished author, huge name in the college football media world. And so we're thrilled to have him with us to tell us all about the Freaks List, how it gets put together, some of the new information that he's acquiring, that NFL teams are acquiring, to judge just how athletic some of these prospects are on Bruce's list. So we are fired up to have Bruce Feldman. We're also going to have JP Finlay, Washington Football Team insider for NBC Sports Washington, to give us a little preview in terms of what we should be watching in this preseason game between the Patriots and the football team, who some of their young players are that we should be keeping an eye on, who some of their end of the roster guys that the Patriots might be interested in at the end of training camp might be. Great conversation with JP. We're going to throw it right to Bruce Feldman, and let's talk about some freaks. Very excited to have with us now Bruce Feldman. You know him from his reporting work for Fox Sports. You know his writing on The Athletic. And for many of you out there that are draft nicks, it was Christmas morning on Monday when Bruce's annual Freaks List dropped. This is the freakiest of Freaks List we've ever seen. It sounds like from you, the largest, 101 players here. I wanted to ask you first, how does this thing come together for those of us who don't know, and why is it as large this year compared to other years?
All right. Well, thank you, Phil, for having me. So the first part is really, I kind of keep an eye on stuff all year round, and just, hey, if there's an athlete I've heard of or somebody's mentioned to me, I just kind of like basically send an email to myself and keep it in a file. Or if I notice something, some strength coach or some coach puts up something freaky on social media, then I send that file too. But I really ramp up in early April and start asking around, because then at the same time it's spring football, you're trying to keep tabs on maybe if some players have emerged or different things like that. And what's been really cool about this process has been, I've been doing this for about 17 years. And really in the last 10 years, there's been a lot of buy-in from strength and conditioning coaches. And those are the relationships that have been really vital for this project, especially because those are the people you lean on to really get the intel of what's really going on. And so between that, and then also as a sideline reporter for Fox Sports, I'm on the road for like the last 5 or 6 years. And what happens is before the game, when I'm out talking to people, usually there are NFL scouts on the field at that point, basically eyeballing prospects. And so I've had a lot of different scouts over the years come up to me and say, hey, ask me about the Freaks List and always talk about it. So those are other relationships where you kind of end up trading information. Jim Nagy, who runs the Senior Bowl, like the last couple of years, I've had really great calls with him and his staff where we trade information and what we're hearing. And what's been really great about that is, I have a guy in my top 30 this year, Bernhard Reimann, who's a 6'7", 304-pound, now offensive tackle at Central Michigan. I'll be honest, I didn't know anything about him until Jim had given me a heads up about him. And then the numbers that their scouts had on him were almost identical to the stuff that I ended up getting a week later, where I reached out to the staff at CMU. And so that part has been really cool, just to, now I've gotten a bunch of players who like reach out to me, either often through social media, but then you have to go through the process of verifying, is it legit? First of all, you want to verify, is the player actually legit? Like, meaning, is it really the guy who's reaching out to you? And then it's like, are the numbers they're saying they're doing, are they authentic? And so that part's been fascinating to see how all those other aspects of it have emerged. And then just the last thing, why it got so much bigger this year. The last 2 years, I've started also expanding beyond just the Power 5 and FBS football. And a player your audience knows pretty well now, Kyle Duggar, was actually the first Division II player that I included in the Freaks List probably 3 years ago. And so I was like, there's a lot of guys like this we hear at the combine or see in the NFL draft process. And I'm like, I can find out about those guys. Why don't I kind of try to get a jump on them? And it's funny because there's a guy at Duggar School of Lenore Ryan. I remember I DM Kyle and I was like, hey, what's the deal with this, Derek? Is he that guy? And he started telling me about him, and then got to know the coaches at Duggar School, and they've kind of given me more information. And that guy's a top 50 freak. He's a receiver, not a DB. But so I think it's just grown from there. And I was like, all right, I can spotlight some of these guys who, if I had, some of them have great backstories. I have an offensive lineman from Southern Illinois, might be the strongest football player in the country right now. 4.0 student, has been through a lot. And when you talk to his head coach and tell me more about him, if I had done a story on a guy like that, I'm not sure how many people would have seen it, because it's like, well, it's Southern Illinois. I don't know if that's going to catch people's eyes. It's an offensive lineman. In the context of the freaks list, it probably gets seen by 100,000 more eyeballs than I would if I did a story just on that. So that's another reason to include it in that, in this whole showcase.
It's fascinating to hear about the process. And for those of us who look forward to the list every year, just to have more names and more people for us to eventually do some more research on ourselves or try to watch over the course of the year. It's vital information that you're providing everybody. Obviously, this list is so well sourced year after year after year. And you actually mentioned a name that had kind of caught my eye because it kind of reminded me of Sebastian Vollmer a little bit. It was Bernhard Raimann. He's from Austria, right? Vollmer's a German guy who came over as a tight end for the University of Houston. But, those names that kind of pique your interest and that you can look into a little bit further later in the season. That's one of the reasons why I feel like your list is so valuable. I do want to ask you about another offensive lineman. Let's talk about the first guy on your list this year, Bruce, because he's a name that probably, big time college football fans know, Evan Neal from Alabama. And he's big, but why is he the number one guy on your list there? How special is he athletically?
Well, first of all, the guys who coach him at Alabama have had numerous first-round pick offensive linemen. This is the biggest one. This is the best one they've seen. So you get that intel. Then Matt Ray, who's the director of sports science there for Nick Saban, he sent me some of the numbers. He was like, this is the rarest of rare athletes we've had in terms of when they tested him and had him monitored on the GPS. He hit almost 19 miles per hour at 6'7", 350 this summer. That means he is like a big tight end in college football would be 6'7", 250. And if he hit almost 19 miles per hour, he'd probably merit a freaks list consideration. Evan Neal is 100 pounds bigger than that, which is crazy to think that he is that big. I have video of him on the freaks list of him doing this split leg box jump. I mean, to have the athleticism, the coordination, the flexibility to be able to do that at that size, I mean, it's crazy. One of the guys who coached him, one of their offensive line coaches, had said, usually when a guy is that big, it's really hard for them to have change of direction or body control. They just can't stop because you have so much momentum at last year he played at 360 pounds. He said he's like 22% body fat, which for context, this coach said, most linemen who are 22% body fat at the combine when they're, probably in the best condition they would ever been in their careers are 300 pounds. This guy's 60 pounds bigger than that. And so the last thing on him was on Sunday morning, the day before the story was coming out, I spoke to Nick Saban and I asked him, you've had all these elite athletes. What is it about Evan, or where does he in context? And he just said, the first words out of his mouth, Evan Neal is very rare, very, very rare. And he proceeded to go into a lot more of the details, but he will be unless there's an injury, the first offensive lineman off the board, just because, Mekhi Becton blew up at the combine. This guy is a better football player than Mekhi Becton, and he is probably going to have a lot more glowing recommendations in terms of his focus, his experience, and his consistency.
Just laughable numbers for him. And we're going to get a chance to see him play a lot this fall, which would be great. And you mentioned, what he's hitting in terms of his miles per hour. With your Evan Neal write-up on the freaks list, you mentioned wattage. And so, Bruce, I wanted to just ask you in terms of you putting your list together, but also what you've heard from NFL people in terms of the information that they're looking for now on these players. How much has the type of information changed with whether it's the GPS tracking data or other means of assessing athleticism, is it just a totally different world than it was when you say started this list?
It is. And that's a great question, because a few years back, and I guess it's more than a few now, like Jadeveon Clowney my number one guy on my list. And the strength coach there, who at one point was a UMass strength coach, Joe Connolly, and now he's at ASU. He had talked about like the Tendo units and how much force Jadeveon Clowney put out. And it was like, the number doesn't mean anything to somebody who's not in strength and conditioning, honestly. But the one thing that did was when he said, here's my next most explosive athlete. And it was not even in the same ballpark as what Clowney put out. And so it was almost like everybody's here and the good ones are here. And then Clowney's like off the chart, right? So when it comes to some of these, the metrics are different. GPS numbers are definitely ones that in the last 3 years I've gotten a lot more of. And I think people kind of know, have a little bit of a range for it. But like, I have a defensive tackle at Georgia who's 307 pounds, and his 40 time is 4.87, which is obviously ridiculously fast. That is something I feel like is digestible for most football fans. They know the 40 pretty well. When I start getting into pro agility times and 3 cones, I think that's where people get a little bit like you need to give them some context, or some context for what it is for a big guy. People know the 40, but once they start getting into some of these other ones that I feel like one of the things that I had, and it's funny because it kind of went viral the day after the Freaks list went up, was the number 2 guy on my list is Aiden Hutchinson, a defensive lineman from Michigan. And one of the things that their strength coach had really talked up was this, that he's able to do this Turkish get up without collars on the barbell, which for people who've been in the gym, they know what collars do on the weight. And that sounded pretty remarkable. And then I have a punter for the first time on the list, Andy Vujanic, who is 6'3", 230 and has like crazy physical numbers. He posted a video going, I'm going to try this. He did it. So people can, to go to my Twitter feed and you'll see exactly what that is. And just imagine if you tried to do it, like how much coordination, how much core strength and balance it takes to do it. So the video helps. I mean, to see it, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe somebody did this. But there's all sorts of other things to factor into your freakiness, I guess.
Is that information, Bruce, readily available for NFL teams? Like, I'm sure it's great for them to be able to know, who the best of the best are, but are they going to be able to, if not now, eventually acquire the miles per hour over the course of the season or a certain game for an entire roster? Or are we still a ways away from that?
Well, one of the things, I don't know if you remember Dave Anderson, he was a slot receiver with the Texans 10 years ago. And so he has a sports performance company that's connected to the Dodgers, because honestly, baseball and some other sports are probably more advanced in the analytics part of that. And so one of the things Dave was talking about was who has that information, where it's like, this is, relevant to like a Patriots example, whereas Julian Edelman's shuttle times and the ability to, like, I remember Dave knew Julian Edelman really well and trained with him, and talk about what exactly it was that made Julian Edelman so special in terms of, like, it's obviously he's not, normally I wouldn't have had him in any freaks list thing. He's average height, he's strong, but he's not, he's not Calvin Johnson. He's not going to run 4.29 or 4.31 and, his vertical jump, but it's like some of these other things where how quick can you separate, and some of the things that they can get the data on. And I think those things are things that are now having more access to. And I think those are the things that it's not the same as in the NFL where they, the zebra and it's like the league wide, and, conferences aren't doing this right now. So it's like, they're not at that point yet. There's some information they can get, but it's not like in the NFL where they have the keys to the kingdom on this.
The last thing I wanted to ask you, Bruce, is about the cornerback position specifically, because here in New England, whether Stephon Gilmore is back and for the long haul, we don't know. J.C. Jackson could be a free agent this year. So I think a lot of Patriots fans will just be trying to figure out who the best corners in the draft are coming out next year. And 2 things surprised me. Number one, that I think the first corner on your list this year is Tariq Woolen, who is from UTSA, which is unusual just to see a player.
Davenport's old school. I don't think anybody would have thought of him. I'd be lying if I said I knew anything about him till I started working on this. His measurables are insane. He was a converted receiver who didn't catch the ball particularly well, but 6'4", they said he's 6'4" and he'll change, 204 pounds, and just crazy, like explosive, 4.3, 4.40, 11.4, 11.5 broad jump numbers. I mean, just that length though is, somebody will take a chance to be like, does he have any kind of feel for football, kind of thing. And they got better. UTSA had a pretty decent year last year. People are going to watch him. I think one of the things that's interesting about this process is sometimes I'll hear from a coach and be like, I don't know if I want to, they tell me the information. They're like, I don't know if I want to necessarily put all this out because they're afraid some big school is going to try to poach their player once they find out how gifted somebody is and go, oh, we'll take a chance on this smaller school guy. He'll want to come play out, in our system or whatever. And I mean, this year we waited later till you can't transfer now and be eligible. So I think it was a moot point. But with younger players, Robert Rochelle, you mentioned cornerbacks, is now here with the Rams. From Central Arkansas, there's a receiver there who's got similar length to Tariq, and he's a younger player, but just there are guys like that who are like, where are these guys coming from and why are they not at bigger schools?
There's so many great nuggets, whether it's you're figuring out about Tariq Woolen for the first time. I loved the Kyler Gordon write-up because we found out from you, Bruce, he's involved in ballet and kung fu. And oh, by the way, he jumps 42 inches in the vertical and he's got like a 3.87 short shuttle. So there's just so much great stuff in there for college football fans, for NFL draft fans. Make sure you check it out. If you haven't checked it out already, it's on The Athletic. You can find Bruce's writing there. You also can see him, of course, on Fox Sports. Bruce, thanks so much for being with us here on Next Pats. This is always great when we get a chance to catch up with you. And I'm sure it's a crazy time of year. Not only is the Freaks List coming out, but you're getting ready to be on the road and following college football as you do. But we really appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
It really is like Christmas morning when that Freaks List drops, because for a lot of us, and even for some NFL folks, they're really interested in the nuggets that come out of this list year after year. And of course, they're on top of it. But Bruce is so tapped in. This could be a resource for them as well. Maybe there's a name or two on this list that you haven't seen before, and you put it aside and you make sure you do a little digging on that name later on down the road. So great for us to chat with Bruce. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to find that Freaks List and dig into it a little bit. Should get us ready for our prototypical Patriots series, which is a long way off from now, but always good to start sniffing around on who might end up on that thing. So let's get right to JP Finlay now. Again, Patriots and the football team, they're playing at Gillette Stadium. I think it's important for us to have a little bit of a sense of where the football team is good before a game like this, because it can help us in terms of our assessment of where the Patriots are at certain positions. So we're going to talk about football team tackles, because I really want to watch Josh Uche. I want to see Matt Judon. I don't know how much these guys are going to play, but I want to understand, okay, who is it that they are going against and how should we rate what it is we're seeing? I also want to see N'Keal Harry continue what has been a strong camp and a strong set of practices, but I want to see him in a real game situation against maybe a little bit better competition at the cornerback spot. So what does the football team have there? Who will he be going up against there? You're going to hear a prototypical Patriot name that is currently on the football team roster dropped by JP. He's dropping all sorts of information on us, so let's get right to him. All right, we've got our friend now, JP Finlay from NBC Sports Washington. JP, first and foremost, the people need to know, how long are the starters going to play in this preseason game?
I think it depends on the starter, right? I think Ryan Fitzpatrick, the quarterback, is a series, maybe 2 series. I can see if there's a 3 and out that he goes back out there just to get a little more work. But Terry McLaurin, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Chase Young, Montez Sweat, I wouldn't expect to see a lot of them. Like if I could get a prop bet that those guys have on over under 9.5 snaps, I would take the under.
Okay, so I don't love to hear that. That's not great for us because what we want to see here in New England is we want to see guys that are emerging play against other good players. For instance, N'Keal Harry, first round pick, has had a rough couple of years, but is having a great camp. And so I was hoping that he might get multiple series against guys who are starting caliber NFL corners because he's not really seeing that here in New England all that often because Stephon Gilmore hasn't been practicing. So you've got these backups that have been in. You know, you mentioned like the star defensive ends, the quarterback. We get that. They may not play a bunch. Any chance we see starting corners play a little bit? And then I have a follow-up corner question for you.
Certainly. So I like the star players, at least the version of stars in Washington, I think won't play that much. But I think guys like on the D-line, Deron Payne and Matt Ioannidis are absolutely Payne's an actual starter, but Ioannidis is starting caliber. I mean, he could be a double-digit sack guy. I think he'll get some work. He's been battling a little bit of injuries, but guys like John Allen, Tim Settle, you're going to see those guys. The corners is interesting because they spent big money on this dude, William Jackson III from the Bengals this offseason. And I think Jackson's going to be really good when the real games start, but he hasn't had the best camp and he's a little banged up. Washington did a practice at FedEx Field last week, kind of simulating, you know, they had 20,000 fans there. It was still just a practice, but there's a little bit of juice to it. He didn't go in that. He missed some 11-11 work earlier this week. So I don't know what you see from William Jackson because Ron Rivera is committed to playing his starters in this game, but I can't imagine anybody with the slightest nick is going to be out there. Kendall Fuller is a super versatile player at corner and a good player. I think you'll see him at least one or two series. Benjamin St-Juste and Jimmy Moreland are probably their next two corners. St-Juste is a third rounder out of Minnesota. Moreland's been here a few seasons, never really emerged as a starter, but is a contributor. I think you'll see plenty of those two guys.
People that listen to Next Pats know about Benjamin St-Juste. We were following that guy for a while because I thought for sure they were going to get a corner, the Patriots, in the first 3 rounds somewhere. They didn't. Now they're dealing with Stephon Gilmore, who looks like he might be holding in. JC Jackson's in a contract year. Even if Gilmore comes back, if he's not extended, that's a contract year. So all that being said, here's my follow-up to the corner question. Are there any corners on this football team roster that you feel like can play, but are kind of on the roster bubble and might be in that group of, hey, our 54th man for your 54th man type of trade, or somebody who gets released and is on waivers that the Patriots might be interested in picking up? Because that's a position to me that outside of JC Jackson, if they don't get Gilmore or they have to deal Gilmore, sort of worst case scenario, they really need some depth there. So are there any names like that we should be looking out for? I did see Darryl Roberts is on the football team roster, former Patriot. But what does that group look like?
So I like Fuller and Jackson. I think they're a really good pair. I think St-Juste has all the tools. We got to see it. I mean, he's a rookie. Moreland's a pretty good fourth corner. After that, they got nothing but questions. Darryl Roberts, there's a guy, Torrey McTyer, has been making plays throughout camp, just kind of a nose for the football. Two guys they've had on the roster that have really been fairly underwhelming are Greg Stroman and Danny Johnson. They got a guy, Cole Luke, who's kind of a corner, kind of a safety. So I don't know that the deep cornerback spots would be something that you guys would be looking at. But at safety, Washington has real depth. So Landon Collins, Cam Curl had a tremendous rookie season. Landon Collins got hurt last year, wasn't playing very well before he got hurt, but Landon Collins has a track record of being a really good player and is having a really good camp. He came back from a torn Achilles in like 8 months. After that, they just drafted a kid, Derek Forrest, in the 5th round out of Cincinnati. They also have Bobby McCain, who was with the Dolphins. You probably remember him. Mm-hmm. He was a surprise cut. Washington scooped him up. Then they have two guys that are just thumpers that don't have kind of elite speed, but they can hit in DeShazer Everett and Jeremy Reeves. They love Everett. He's been a special teams captain here for a while. That's 6 corners. I don't see them cutting a guy they just drafted in the 5th round. I don't see him carrying 6 corners.
Safeties,
rather.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I could see maybe that's an area where they have, a little bit of a surplus and maybe something happens there. But the other thing, I mean, this is the first preseason game. Injuries are probably going to happen. So I wouldn't see them making any sort of moves until they get through the 3rd preseason game. And then if they get that far and it's close to roster cuts and they know, all right, well, we got too many guys here. Maybe that's when they work the phones. And I could definitely see Ron and Bill talking.
Well, and safety is a good spot for the Patriots to be looking, because they and people don't really think of this group that way because they're so top heavy, but they have Devin McCourty, they have Kyle Duggar, they have Adrian Phillips. All of those guys are going to play a lot. They don't really have all that much after those guys. And they usually like to load up at safety because that's such a big special teams position. And we know Bill Belichick loves his special teamers. And so that's an interesting one that you bring up. And I also just love the fact that Cam Curl is turned into a real NFL player, because when we do our prototypical Patriots series before the draft every year, he was a rookie last year, correct?
Yeah. Yep. Out of Arkansas.
One of the best rookie background stories that I can remember in all our years doing prototypical Patriots, which is suspended by the team in 2018 after reportedly being spotted talking to and taking pictures with members of the Mississippi State dance team during warmups before a game. And Arkansas, where Cameron Curl went, promptly lost 52-6. So this guy is taking selfies with the dance team of the Mississippi State, of Mississippi State, and they go on to lose that game 52-6. And the coaching staff gets so pissed at him that they actually suspend him. He's turned into a player, so good for him. I love that.
Awesome. I didn't know that story. He's a player. I mean, if you look at like any of the Pro Football Focus, emerging player lists, he's on it, and had 3 picks last year. He kind of really came on strong probably the second half of the season, and Washington's got a little bit of an issue. If it's he and Collins on the field a lot together, they kind of lack that elite deep speed. It should, you get matched up against a real burner, but those are schematic things for them to work out.
Last thing we want to ask you before you hop on your plane and you fly to beautiful Providence, Rhode Island. Sam Cosmi is another name that we talked about quite a bit leading up to this draft. Again, that was a position I thought the Patriots might hit. And Cosmi seemed like their kind of guy, really good athlete, really good tools coming out of Texas. Is he going to start for them, JP? And is he somebody that looks like the real deal to you? Because again, we're going to be judging Patriots players based on what they do against these football team players. And I think Cosmi, if he's at right tackle, could end up seeing a little bit of Josh Uche, who's somebody who's gotten a ton of hype here in New England this summer.
So it's like kind of the first question when you ask how much of the starter's going to play. Cosmi is one of those starters that I think is going to play maybe the whole first quarter, maybe into the second quarter, because he's a starter, but he's also a second-round rookie that needs the work. I'll be honest, he was getting worked early on in camp, especially while we were down in Richmond. Just the speed of Montez Sweat and Chase Young going against those guys every day is not something you see at the University of Texas, or probably even in the Big 12, honestly. And I think there was a serious acclimation period. But since the pads have come on, and like I do, that the pads didn't come on the first 6 days of camp. Since the pads have come on and they're starting to kind of get into their actual blocking techniques and strategy and schemes, he's looked a lot better. He looks like a real tackle. Like he should hit the ground running. He's still gonna be a rookie offensive lineman, which is always kind of a dangerous spot. But I think not only does he look ready to go, they cut Morgan Moses, who had been the right tackle here for a while. They cut him. He signed with the Jets. They have Charles Leno from the Bears playing left tackle on a 1-year deal. If things go well for Cosmi this year, I think they'll try to flip him to left tackle next year.
So that'll be fun. I mean, tough gig for Sam Cosmi to come in and be going against Montez Sweat and Chase Young as a rookie, but it sounds like he's actually holding his own. So that could be a good matchup there. Good test for Josh Uche, who we've seen go against Trent Brown and, make a little bit of noise. So a lot of little different angles for us here on Next Pats. We're more focused on these young Patriots players, potential roster additions down the line, kind of end of the roster additions. Our listeners love that kind of stuff, JP. So it's great for us to have you on to give us all of the lowdown on the Washington football team. Have a great flight. We're going to see you very soon. And some of this will be a little bit dated by the time you get here and people actually listen to the podcast, but we don't care. We want to keep them as up to date and hit with the most fresh information as possible. You're bringing that to us.
I appreciate it anytime, dude. Can't wait to be in Foxborough, get some chowder. And so we have a running gig on the radio show where I have said that Mac Jones with his shirt off looks like me with my shirt off. I cannot wait to watch Mac Jones play football. I cannot wait.
It maybe gives you a little bit of hope. Maybe he ends up playing well and you say, hey, man, I could see myself slinging it out there too. I think he'll do that for a lot of people sitting at home watching this game, JP.
The 39-year-old comeback story that the world didn't know they needed.
Crazier things have happened. I mean, let's be honest. JP, thanks again for being with us, man.
Thanks, dude. No problem. See you soon.
Love having JP on Next Pats. That guy is the best. And again, I just feel like this is a good time of year for us to look ahead, as the Patriots do, as their pro scouting department does. You know, that thing is led by Steve Cargile now. This is something that the Patriots are, looking at week after week, day after day. They want to know how depth charts across the league are stacking up, so that when it comes time for these rosters to be pared down, they know which players might be available to them, and they have an understanding of how their hierarchy of those potential cuts stacks up. Who are they interested in? Who are they not interested in? What positions might they try to address late in training camp? Where do they feel like they're thin? And that could change over the course of the summer based on injuries and other factors. But they're looking at things like, okay, who's the fourth corner right now for the football team? Who's the fifth or sixth corner? Which guy plays a lot of special teams and has shown us something, in a college workout, and now we're tracking him into the NFL. And if he shows us something a little bit in this preseason game and the next couple preseason games, maybe that's a guy that we're willing to bring on and give a roster spot to, because we feel like we have a need. We've seen this happen before. Oftentimes it's with players that the Patriots get to see up close and personal. Preseason games, yes. Joint practices, especially, they have a long history of hiring joint practice opponents at some point in time. So there is definitely still stuff for us to track, especially if you're loving this podcast, if you like this Next Pat stuff, if you love the draft, if you love the angles that we're talking about when it comes to Patriots young players. There's going to be a lot of those getting a lot of time against the football team, but important to watch the young players on the other side of the ball as well. All right, so that was a great episode of Next Pats. In my humble opinion, might be slightly biased, but hopefully you enjoyed it. Next week, we're going to be down in Philly, again, for joint practices between the Patriots and the Eagles. There's going to be plenty to dissect there. We're going to be taking a close look at that Eagles roster. We're going to be continuing to track how these young Patriots players and this young Patriots core is starting to develop against consistent competition in practice settings. Some of the most enjoyable moments that I've had covering this team have been during joint practices, because we've learned so damn much about the Patriots at these sessions. So that's next week. And of course, we'll have a Next Pats for you coming from Philly. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. Until then, enjoy the rest of your week and enjoy this preseason action. We've got real live football games to watch. It's been a while. No, it's not regular season stuff, but we know you love it nonetheless. We'll talk to you soon.